Good morning. My name is Angela McClellan. I'm the Executive Director of FNG, and I'm very happy to interview Victor van Hoorn, the Executive Director of Eurosif today, on the occasion of the launch of our market study 2021. Eurosif is FNG's European umbrella organization. It represents all the European Sustainable Investment Fora in Brussels, and we're very happy to have a strong Eurosif because on the one hand, we get regular updates on current developments in Brussels, and on the other hand, we also work together very closely in policy statements on the current regulations and also in contributions to EU consultations on sustainable finance issues. So welcome, Victor.
Thank you very much.
So the sustainable finance agenda is growing and growing. And the issue everyone is talking about at the moment is the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is actually entered into force in March 2021, and which is now posing some challenges for market participants, I've heard. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you see these challenges in the implementation of the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation? And also, the most important question, how effective do you think the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation is in the declared objective by the EU, namely in channeling funds, financial flows investment into sustainable investment?
Thank you very much, Angela. Now, indeed, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation was one of the flagship initiatives that were part of the initial EU Action Plan on Sustainable Finance from 2018. And at that time, I think the industry landscape for ESG, sustainable, responsible investment was already growing. But at that time, the EU had diagnosed a need for much more transparency in that market, so that investors could understand what was going on, how those products were contributing to sustainability. And I think it's always good to remember that the SFDR as such is a novelty internationally. Is that it's the first time a jurisdiction of this size decides to move with a regulatory framework of this magnitude in the space of responsible and sustainable investment. And what's important to understand is that the SFDR really takes this approach of double materiality, looking both at sustainability risks, but for the first time already trying to map out a bit sustainability impacts of investments. So I think that's very interesting. And at this stage, I think the EU is really the only jurisdiction doing that, as far as I know. In terms of challenges, of course, I think there's several main challenges. One is the availability of data, because at the end of the day, what we're really interested as investors, as stakeholders, as policymakers, what we want to understand is what is the impact or the risks linked to investments in investee companies. And currently the data landscape from those investment companies is either incomplete, inconsistent, or we don't have quality and verifiable information, which means that for the investors that invest in those companies, it's very hard to satisfy their own disclosures obligation. So that will take quite a bit of challenges in terms of fully complying with the regulation and getting that information to a high enough quality, but that will take multiple years. I think the second biggest challenge that we see is that the idea was also for the SFDR to bring some standardization to the market, or at least some comparable disclosures. I think the principle of comparability is very important in the framework. But there, the legislation identifies different categories of products. The one that really look at integrating sustainability risks in their investment process, the ones so-called Article 8 that promote environmental or social characteristics, so they go a bit further in terms of sustainability. And finally, probably the most ambitious category, the Article 9 category, which is for products having a sustainable investment as their core objective. But the problem is for market participants that distinguishing and classifying the products in different categories remains challenging, because the legislation probably doesn't offer full clarity on that. So I think these are really the two main challenges. On the data side, we are seeing some developments, some positive developments with a recent proposal around non-financial information or corporate sustainability reporting directive proposal a few weeks ago. On the classification, we hope that in the over the next couple of months we will get a bit more clarity from the European Commission and regulators about how market participants are supposed to interpret that. And I think this is something you see translated in the numbers of the market, where estimates are varying for Europe, based on very initial rough data out a couple of trillion euros in those Article 8 and Article 9 products, but where we see that initial assessment is that there's quite a bit of discrepancy in how each firm has interpreted the requirements, and you see also quite a few firms waiting to make those decisions.
Yes, thank you very much. I can only say I agree. I fully agree with those insights. That's also what I hear from our membership. And then on top of that, there is also a second set of rules kicking in soon, with the first two objectives of the taxonomy, market participants being expected to disclose how they comply with that by the end of this year. How do you think, where are the challenges there in your view?
I think that the challenge again are twofold when it comes to taxonomy. So the taxonomy was also the other big flagship initiative as part of this 2018 action plan, the purpose of which was to come up with, if you want, a common dictionary or list of what we would consider as sustainable economic activities. As you said, we have now in the coming months the first two objectives of the taxonomy, which is climate mitigation and adaptation, and where essentially it is identifying a list of activities that are fully compatible with the objective of the EU of being carbon neutral by 2050. That means that we have a situation where market participants are still waiting for the final rules. So the final rules are still under development. We don't quite know the details. So in terms of making the assessment, that's challenging. And secondly, rather similar to the SFDR, the taxonomy is a incredibly data intensive piece of regulation to apply correctly, because it doesn't really look like in a traditional way at investments, in that, how those are profitable or not. It doesn't mention anything about that. It's really a technical piece of legislation looking at technical requirements for each economic activity. And again, availability of data remains a challenge. But indeed, by 2022, the Article 8 and Article 9 funds, which we talked about previously, those will have to disclose how their portfolio aligns with the taxonomy.
Yeah, and both the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation and also the taxonomy regulations are still outputs from the March 2018 EU Action Plan on Sustainable Finance. But the EU has already formulated a new framework, the renewed Sustainable Finance-Strategie, which was already under consultation and is expected to be published in its final form in June, I believe. What are Eurosif expectations towards this new strategy? What is still missing in the EU Sustainable Finance agenda?
So again, I think what's first of all very important to understand here is that the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan of 2018 was under the previous European Commission, and where it focused very much at getting sustainability mainstreamed into the financial system. Of course, since then, we have a new European Commission, we have the EU Green Deal, which is a much more holistic approach to sustainability across all the sectors of the economy that matter. And so this is a change of paradigm, and therefore you have to really understand that this new strategy is looking through that new paradigm compared to the previous action plan. And there we expect, first of all, to have a much more systemic focus. So we expect policy measures looking at the financial system as a whole, and how the financial system is, able or ready or not to deal with some of the, systemic climate change or biodiversity related risks. So I think that's where we will see a first pillar of actions. Second thing is that we obviously, since the previous iteration of the action plan, we now have the EU climate law, which enshrines into law the climate neutrality targets of the Paris Agreement, as well as intermediary targets of the 2030 in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. And we expect that will also, put put some onus and expectation on financial institutions in terms of what is commonly referred to as net zero, or as how do you align with the objectives of the climate law. So that's something else. And I think for us at Eurosif, I think the most important thing is that we also shift the paradigm a little, whereby we started a couple of years ago focusing about introducing more mainstreaming sustainability in products. But actually, at the end of the day, what we're really wanting to do is to see how does that translate in real world sustainability outcomes. Does it make a difference? And I think that's the question you've asked me, is like, is it effective at reorienting capital towards the investments we need? And there, I think that is the biggest challenge. And therefore, what we see as important issues, we would expect a greater focus on, again, SFDR style, standardizing the market, more consistent product classification. Secondly, we think that it's time to look again at stewardship and engagement with investee companies. That remains one of the most effective tools to engage with investee companies and change them. We've seen recently, with ExxonMobil and its directors being facing scrutiny from shareholders and other initiatives, that will change. Finally, we also think that we see ahead of COP26 a lot of companies and financial institutions doing net zero claims. I think it's important there that we start to bring a bit more consistency, coherence, and robustness in those claims. I think you see a lot of different people using different scenarios, different assumptions, carbon offsetting or no carbon offsetting. I think it's high time that we get a bit more structure and transparency and robustness around those. And finally, if you look at SFDR, if you look at taxonomy, if you look at net zero and climate scenario planning, for example, across the wide range of it, that all depends on data. And there we see data providers becoming increasingly crucial elements of this architecture, of the ability of the financial sector to deliver on those outcomes. And therefore we would expect, and probably to see some public policy initiatives around the role of data providers, and whether they might need to have some light touch regulatory frameworks designed for them as well.
Thank you, very interesting. So there's more to come from the EU in this regard, and we're really looking forward to that, and also to shaping the agenda from Eurosif side and from the SIF side, representing the sustainable side of the market participants. So we're really looking forward to continuing to work together on shaping this agenda and advancing it. So thank you very much, Victor. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I'm sure there is more to come soon, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you very much. Nice day to you too.